Well, my clock reads 12 o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and get started with introductions. I'm sure we might have some more people filter in. My name is Whitney Broadaway. I'm the collections manager here at the Orange County Regional History Center. I would suggest that you write down my email address while we're on this slide, because this is not something that you all had to register for and things like that. I don't have anyone's email or contact information to say send you some information slides. So if you would like me to send you a copy of some slides or something when we're done, you'll just need to reach out to me via email, and I'd be happy to do that. Also, of course, answer any further questions you have. Like I was mentioning, oh, never mind, Amanda Henry has everyone's email. I don't know what I'm talking about. So wonderful. So since Amanda has everyone's email, I can send everyone out some slides after this presentation, but also feel free to contact me as well separately. The chat option, please take a look at the Zoom webinar chat if you'd like to type in any questions you have during the webinar. Currently there are 18 people here, so obviously we don't have, everyone doesn't have an audio option. So if you have a question while we're going through, feel free to type it here. I'll try to keep an eye on it. I might be a little delayed in answering your question, but at least at the end of the webinar, I'll go through and answer any questions in the chat that I've missed. And I think with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So today we're going to be talking about preserving family photos. I'm going to try and focus specifically on family photos, and I might talk a little bit about what we do here at the museum, but I'd really like this presentation to be full of basically options that you can do at home and not be, you know, a bunch of very museum level strategies that aren't really feasible for the everyday person. Also, I apologize, this presentation was supposed to include video so that I could show you some examples and everything. The video on my computer was working yesterday, but of course today my web camera on my laptop just doesn't work. So unfortunately it will just be the slides and my voice. Whoops. I'm trying to progress slides. Here we go. So to get started, I just like to start off with talking about the makeup of photographs in general. There are lots of different types of photographs. This list up at the top is really only a sampling. It's not inclusive. But most photographs are comprised of something like this: several different layers of material laminated on top of each other. This is an example of a silver gelatin photograph, where it has the paper is the substrate. Silver gelatin photographs have a burrito layer, which is basically a whitening layer to smooth and whiten the paper surface. And then the emulsion layer, which is silver particles suspended in gelatin. Now, every photograph has a different, every different kind of photograph has a different process, a different type of chemical composite, often different substrates like metal, but the essential parts of the fact that it is layered on top of each other and it is photoreactive, as in it's been somehow the image has been created through the exposure to light, is what makes all photographs part of the same family. And it's also what makes them very fragile especially to light, and fragile to climate changes, because they are a mixture of several different materials all put into one. So I want to start by talking about basically storage and the big picture of that. So where are you keeping your photographs? Because I think we need to get that out of the way first. So you want to make sure that your photographs are basically in a comfortable environment for an average person. So that means at the museum, we keep our photographs around 70%, 70 degrees for the temperature, and a relative humidity, we're shooting for 50%. But at home, that's not necessary. You might keep your house a little warmer, a little colder, maybe not in Florida. And most people at home don't really have a ready way to gauge your relative humidity in your house. But the idea is your normal AC will usually regulate to those things, and you kind of have a temperature and an environment that you like to keep your house in. So you want to keep your photos in there with you as well. This is all to get at, please don't store your photos in attics or garages, or if you're one of those odd people in Florida that has a basement, don't store them in the basement, in outside sheds. If it's hot or humid, that will be a very bad environment for your photographs. Here's an example of lots of photos that are curling. Like we talked about, there are several different layers that make a photograph, that come together to make a photograph. So when photographs get really humid, basically the paper substrate of the photograph starts absorbing the water and it expands, but that emulsion layer doesn't absorb water, so it doesn't expand. And so you have these different materials reacting in different ways. We do have someone from New York joining us. And yes, cold extremes of anything can affect photos. So even extreme cold can affect a photo. Usually it's not something we deal with as much here in Florida, but you want to watch out for extreme cold, because again, it can cause the same effect. Basically, temperature and humidity are related to each other. And so extreme colds can either cause the humidity to drop a lot, which would cause a lot an extreme, a rapid off-gassing of all of that moisture out of the material, which could cause it to shrink and crumple. But also sometimes extreme cold can cause condensation to occur, ice to form, frost, and that can really affect the water levels as well. The water levels can go up. So basically you want to avoid extreme anything when storing your photographs. And then, to protect your home against pests. Pests are another thing. This photo is an example of what roaches and silverfish can do to a photograph. And these are very common pests, at least in Florida. I'm sure in other parts of the world as well. And they love to eat paper, and especially photographs, because of that emulsion that's been used to fuse something onto the paper. And they will eat it and tear it apart. So just keeping your home free of pests and having regular checks or putting out traps can also be a part of saving your family heirlooms. And this photo is an example of some silver mirroring on a silver gelatin print. You can see in these dark areas of the photograph where the photograph should be a dark black. It's instead a silvery metallic. And that is caused by pollution and contact with the environment and stuff like that. So we don't have a whole lot of control over that, other than keeping your photos in your house should protect against, coming into environmental pollutants that can basically react with the silver suspended in this gelatin and turn the silver particles from black into their metallic silvery form. So moving on from the big picture and looking at the nitty-gritty, one of the most important thing about storing photographs and really all documents after you address the envelope, which is what we like to call the building. So making sure the building, i.e. your house and where they're stored, is safe and a good environment, is basically what is coming in direct contact with the photograph. So what are you putting right next to the photo? What kind of folders or paper sleeves or plastic sleeves are these photos in? So when looking at products to, oh, I'm having trouble with my own windows. When looking at products to use for storing your photos, I want to talk a little bit about what acid-free and archival mean when you're looking at paper products. So acid-free is a term that gets thrown around a lot, and it's not really fair. There's no regulation on the term acid-free as far as labeling it on products. Most companies are able to label their product as acid-free if it comes out of the factory testing at a neutral pH. And so when we talk about the acid content of paper, that's what we mean by acid-free. That paper with a high acid content tends to break down faster, and it can also off-gas and spread its high acid content to other materials, such as your photographs or other housing materials. So when companies make paper, they usually make paper out of, or they used to, cheap wood pulp material that has a lot of lignin in it. And this lignin that comes from the wood pulp, that's what starts to break down over time. So it's not necessarily acidic when it comes out of the factory, but over time it will start to break down, release a lot of acid and gases, and start to break down not only its own paper, but also anything it's next to or in contact with. So what you're really looking for, rather than acid-free or archival as far as when you're purchasing something, because these terms are very kind of wishy-washy and can be used without a whole lot of oversight, you're looking for something that says lignin-free. So that means it's a higher quality paper. It's not made from that wood pulp. Or look for something that says it's cotton rag. That means that it's made out of cotton and it doesn't have wood pulp in it. And you could especially look for this PAT, this photographic activity test. That if something is labeled with this icon, that means it passed the photographic activity test, which was created by the Image Permanence Institute, and it is an extreme, it is like the Olympic sport of materials for how will it react to photographs. And if this material is completely inert and will not react to photographs, the Image Permanence Institute grants it its award of the PAT. Now for plastic, it's a little bit easier because you don't see, you can just go by the actual makeup of the plastic. You don't have to search for things like acid-free or archival, even though they will also be labeled with that probably. You're looking for plastics that are polyester or polypropylene or polyethylene. Common brand names for this is like Mylar. You want to avoid anything that's polyvinyl chloride, that's PVC and just vinyl. So where plastics become difficult, with paper they make pins and things that you can test their acid content and stuff like that. You can't really test plastics if you find a mystery plastic in your family photo, like if you have an album full of plastic photo sleeves. So normally when I find mystery plastics in both the museum collection and my personal family photos, I err on the side of caution and I replace those plastics. But if you can also, just if it looks yellow, if it's cracking and brittle, if it smells plasticky, all of those are signs that it is the wrong plastic. Now, you can throw out all of that information pretty much if you want to just purchase from these suppliers. These are excellent archival material suppliers. They're the ones we use. Unfortunately, archival materials are very expensive. So for at-home use, a lot of times what I recommend is to prioritize basically creating an envelope, a micro environment around your single photographs, and you can start to maybe compromise on your way out. For example, getting the proper sleeves made out of the right plastic from print file, these sleeves or these paper envelopes, and then when you get to the actual binders or the boxes, maybe buying something that looks really nice and, you know, isn't cheap cardboard, and stuff like that, but maybe it's from Walmart, and start working your way out. Obviously, there's what's best and what will work with your budget, and sometimes you have to manage that. Now, there is also a question of, I don't think I have a slide for this. Yeah, there's also a question of which kind of sleeve should you choose, a plastic sleeve or a paper sleeve? I prefer plastic sleeves for my photographs because I like to be able to open my box or my binder and see my photographs without having to pull my photographs out, because that always is a risk of damage when you're pulling photographs in and out of an enclosure. And with paper sleeves, I would not be able to see my photographs. It's not very enjoyable for me. But one thing to know about plastic sleeves is they can retain moisture. So if you ever have a moisture problem in your home, please remember your photographs. Remember to go to them and pull them all out of your paper sleeve so that they can dry, your plastic sleeve, so that they can dry out. Otherwise, they'll just be trapped with the water, and they'll just continue to be damaged, and they won't be able to dry out. So I want to talk a little bit about methods to preserve basically all formats of photographs, and then we'll kind of go into some specifics for different specific types of photos. So first, number one rule of photographs is not to touch the front of photographs. It's very harmful to that emulsion layer of the photograph, whether it's a photo that's on metal or on paper or on glass, or on plastic film. If you touch the emulsion layer, your skin oils, no matter how clean your hands are, will start to etch into them. And I've got a couple of examples of what it looks like after your skin oils sit on a photograph and start to leave their permanent imprint on the photo. There's no way to take that out. What we do at the museum is we use gloves, but that is often a little bit of a ridiculous ask for you in your home and your home photos. So I would just remind you to hold the photos either, cupped in your hand or gently by the edges. Most photos do have a white edging. Some of them don't, but you have a little bit of leeway there to hold your photos by the edges. Just be very careful not to basically grab a photo and put your thumb right in the middle of the photograph, because that will eventually, in 5 years, when you pull out that photograph again, you'll see a huge thumbprint. And I've got a question here. Can cotton gloves be washed and or reused? Absolutely. So we use nitrile gloves here at the museum just for their ease. But definitely at home, if you really want to be intense and wear gloves while handling your photographs, you can absolutely buy yourself a pair of cotton gloves, or I have some, I've just forgotten the material of them. It's a alternative to cotton. But you can buy yourself some reusable and washable gloves. I know some people that just use some old, church gloves, and they just have some gloves and they use those. Those are absolutely fine as long as there's no grit. The gloves are clean. There's no dirt that the gloves might scratch across the surface. Just about any glove will do. I'm thinking of some exceptions, maybe not like leather driving gloves, usually because they just have some intense stitching and that might cause some scratching. Their fingertips aren't very soft and stuff like that. But right, it's just basically anything to create a barrier between your skin and the photograph. And light exposure. Like I said, all photographs are basically a process of whether they're developed out onto paper from a negative, or if they are developed directly onto their substrate, they were created by exposing something to light, whether that's silver gelatin or other chemicals. And so they are something that is very sensitive to light. So this is probably one of the hardest asks that I have as far as trying to help you preserve the photos you have at home, is to take all of your photos off display. The ideal would be if you have any photos framed and on display in your home, if you're able to take them out of their frames, get a nice high quality scan of them and be able to basically display a printed out reproduction, that would be ideal. And here's some examples of what can happen after a photograph is displayed on a wall for a really long time. I especially love this color photograph example. You can see even in this edging, color photographs are especially fragile. You can see around here that this even still is not the original color of this color photograph. In this edge area, it's already very magenta and starting to wear out, but then you move in to where the photo mat wasn't protecting it from light, and it's almost turned into a black and white image. And then the same with these two black and white photographs. They have been exposed to so much light that they're almost completely gone. And so rather than risk that with your family photographs, it is better to store your family photographs in boxes, in binders, out of light, but still have them displayed in basically a replica format. I've got the question, is home scanning okay, or is that higher light than professional scanning? I wouldn't worry about the light of scanning. Scanning does subject an item to a lot of light, but it's a one-time thing. You scan it and then you're done, and in theory it should go into storage. Home scanning should be fine. Make sure you have a good scanner that can do a really high DPI. If your DPI really depends on the size of the original photograph, but I would say as long as your scanner can go up to 1200 DPI, you could use your home scanner. The only thing is, if you don't feel comfortable removing your photograph from whatever it's framed in, I would definitely reach out to a professional or someone to help you with that. But at-home scanning is fine. Just like we've talked about, be careful when handling the photograph. Watch out for any grit or particulates that are on the scanning bed, the glass of the scanner. Make sure that is clean before you put the photograph down. Make sure if you clean the scanning bed, it's completely free of any cleaners. There's not Windex still sitting on it when you put the photograph on, and scan it, and you can take it to Walgreens or wherever to get a replica printed off. So I wanted to talk about a few formats that you might not have in your family collection, but maybe you do. And I am going to work really, really hard to restrain myself from going down the rabbit hole, because I absolutely love all of these fun types of photographs. So I'm going to try to not tell you everything about them, but just talk about how you would need to handle these types of photographs at home. So I want to start with some of the first types of photographs and cased images. So daguerreotypes being the first really commercially available photograph, and then ambrotypes and tintypes. These are the three types of photographs that you might find in a case like this. And these images, of course I have a case sitting right here if my camera was working, but these cases usually have a cover, but also sometimes they don't, because these covers fall off very easily. So you might have something like this, where you have basically this big box, And you've got this photograph very ornately framed inside. Now, I could go into helping you figure out whether your cased image is a daguerreotype, ambrotype, or tintype, but that's less important than what's more important is all three of these cased images, basically what you need to do is do nothing other than storing it out of light. Again, these are very sensitive to light damage. They can be stored either by laying flat or sitting upright, like in a folder or something like that. But the biggest no-no in these cased images is trying to open them. A lot of times people will have a cased image like this, and here I've got Frederick Douglass in a daguerreotype and Frederick Douglass in an ambrotype. Unfortunately, I couldn't find Frederick Douglass on a tintype, so I have this woman. But a lot of times you'll have a family photograph in one of these cases and it's slid down, and you can see that the image has shifted, and you're just like, oh, but if I just, you know, lift out this glass front and I can fix it and put it all back together and it'll be fine. Especially when it comes to the daguerreotype, the casing, even if the casing is starting to wear, sometimes the glass will start to have little spots appear on the underside, as if something is, you know, basically congealing or forming, or something is happening. Even when that is happening, it is so important that these photographs stay out of basically the open air. Our modern day pollutants can really wreck a daguerreotype if it's opened up and taken out of this casing and exposed to air. So especially since you might not know exactly what kind you have, it's best to just not open a cased image. If you happen to have one of these that you're really, really concerned about, that's when you need to seek some professional help. Reach out to a photo conservator or your local museum, and they might be able to put you in touch with someone who does this specialized work. So glass plates, real quick, you probably don't have any glass plates. So unless you have an ambrotype, these are actually on glass, but they're usually not outside of their cases. But glass plates usually come in the form of glass plate negatives, and those usually aren't in family collections. So why am I talking about them? Because what you might have is you might have a paper photograph like this one that's gotten stuck onto the glass of a frame. So I don't know if you can tell, you can especially see the line right here. This is a framed photograph, and instead of being surrounded by a mat, the photo has actually been directly pressed against the glass in the frame. And over time, the emulsion of the photograph has basically fused to the glass in front of it. So I want to talk about glass images real quick, because basically if you have a photograph that has fused itself onto the glass, and this is called ferrotyping, it's irreversible. A professional photo conservator cannot undo this. So what you have now is you need to either take a really nice scan of it, obviously through the glass, or you can do that, and then I would suggest, I don't like throwing anything out because you never know what might happen in the future, as far as there might be a way to undo it in the future, or there might be better scanning methods. You would need to basically keep it as if it were like a glass plate negative, which this is a very intense housing arrangement that I just like to throw in here for fun. But basically they make four-fold flap envelopes that you basically store the whole sheet of glass, usually vertically in a specialized box. So if you have anything like this, please feel free to reach out to me. I can send you some links to the actual, just the I can take you directly to the products from Gaylord or a print file to help you care for something on glass, whether that's an actual photo on glass, like a negative, or if it's just a paper photograph that has become fused to its glass frame. Now, photos on paper. This is what we mostly have in our collections. Oh, with the exception of course, I forgot to talk about this because I'm not using my props all over the table here. I did want to talk a little bit about tintypes because I know I personally, in my family photographs, I have a lot of tintypes. If you have a little metal photograph and it's not in a cased image, it's probably a tintype. Probably not a daguerreotype, even though a daguerreotype is also on metal. You rarely see these outside of their cases. As photo methods progressed, when the tintype came around, one of its advantages is it wasn't quite as fragile. The image layer wasn't quite as fragile as a daguerreotype. So tintypes, even though they would still come cased, they often came loose. And people would often carry these just loose metal sheets in their pockets. A soldier would have a tintype out with them, or they would just come in like a little paper frame. And so you often have tintypes. Most of my family tintypes are extremely bent. And while they are very scratched and things like that, the image layer, as far as still being able to see the person, is still pretty good. So with tintypes, one of the biggest things as far as housing a tintype, if you have one loose, is making sure it doesn't continue to get scratched or scratch other things. So I would suggest making like a little, and of course I had this to show you guys, but what I did this morning is I just grabbed a piece of plain cardstock paper, and I cut out a little 4-flap enclosure for one of our tintypes to show you that you don't need to necessarily order a fancy and very probably expensive 4-flap enclosure online. You can make one out of cardstock. Just to wrap, basically put your little tintype in an envelope that will be sturdy enough to keep it from getting scratched or scratching something else. The 4-flap enclosure, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, let's see if I can describe it. Basically, it's a flat piece of paper, but in the shape of an X, that you would put your image in the middle of, and then you have 4 flaps on each of its sides that you can flip down. That's usually better for tintypes rather than a paper envelope, because then you won't have the sliding in and out that can scratch that emulsion surface as you put it in and out of the envelope. That's why the 4-flap is better, because you just set it down, and I usually set it down upside down on just the plain flat surface of the paper, and I flip all the flaps over its back. Sorry, I forgot to talk about tintypes because I know I have a lot. But now let's move on to paper photographs, which is probably what your family photograph collection is mostly made out of. So I want to talk about just some basics for your paper photos. You never want to use any kind of fasteners on your photos, such as staples or rubber bands or paper clips, even plastic clips. Plastic clips are an archival answer to the problem of rusty paper clips, but plastic clips should really only be used for paper documents, and even then should be used with care, because even though plastic clips are made out of inert plastic and won't rust, they still cause damage such as scratching and bending, and should never be used on photographs. You should never use adhesives such as glue or tape on a photograph. As you can see, here's an example of a photo in our collection that at some point someone decided they were going to fix all of the tears in it with tape. And as you can see, it has now caused a much bigger problem than just the tears. But you might be asking, what about scrapbooking? If you are an avid scrapbooker, and want to put your photos in an album that's more than just, you know, plastic sleeves, you want to actually put it in a really nice looking, you know, paper custom album and arrange things. First of all, make sure your paper backing that you're putting these on is going to be, you know, lignin free, archival, all of that we talked about. But also go for photo corners. They make plastic, so see-through photo corners, and also the classic, you know, black or white paper photo corner. Um, Sorry, I just saw that some people are putting in some questions in the question and answer instead of chat. Oh, I'm getting to that question. And oh, great. I unintentionally talked about tintypes without case. So make sure you use photo corners if you're into scrapbooking. That means that basically the paper or plastic photo corner is the thing that gets adhesed onto your scrapbooking page, and the photograph just slips in there. That means nothing permanent has been done to the photograph to stick it onto the page. And then you want to gently label photos on the back with a soft pencil. I, you know, really recommend that you do this. It might seem counterintuitive with all the talk we're doing of, you know, not harming your photograph, not doing anything permanent that can't be undone to it. But if you use a pencil and not a pen, because pen ink can eventually, you know, seep through paper and cause some reactions. A pencil is not going to, you know, pencil lead is not going to do that. And if you're gentle so that you don't create an impression on the other side of the image, you won't be causing any harm to your photograph. But also because of the amount of photos we get at the museum, the amount of photos I have in my family collection that I look at them and I have no idea who these people are. If you have time to go through and label people in your photos, your future family members will thank you, and maybe a future museum at some point will be thanking you for actually writing people's names and the place and the context and why is this photo important. Just anything you can think of, as long as you write with a soft pencil. And never store your photos rolled. Again, like we talked about the many layers of a photo, if a map is stored rolled really tightly and we get it into the museum, a map that's just on paper, we can slowly introduce it to some humidity. We can kind of use some humidity to loosen up those paper fibers and eventually flatten it out and let it dry completely flat, and we can flatten the map. With a photograph, if a photograph is stored rolled, that photo emulsion will take on that rolled shape. And even though it's attached to paper, which could be flattened out, the emulsion layer won't allow that photograph to be flattened out very easily without it cracking completely and losing the image. And oh, here's what I already talked about, paper or plastic as far as housing methods. Now to get to someone else's, oh, that's coming later. Cyanotypes, a real quick note on cyanotypes and other colored photographs. They tend to be more fragile. And this includes blueprints, because blueprints are a form of cyanotype. So when you're looking at archival supplies, if you see something called buffered paper, that's B-U-F-F-E-R-E-D, what that means is there's been a little bit of a chemical component added to the paper to make it even more opposite of acidic and turn it basic. So it probably has, you know, like a 9.5 pH level to counteract any materials that might have something above a 7.0 pH level, which is really nice when you're storing really acidic materials. It can keep that acid from migrating into other materials. It can sometimes help actually neutralize the acid content in the material you're storing, But unfortunately, because photographs rely so heavily on chemical processes to make them, a lot of times introducing those added chemicals to them can cause damage. So stay away from buffered paper when storing your photographs, especially for cyanotypes and any colored photos. Stereo views, real quick, I just want to mention there's nothing a whole lot different from stereo views other than just a mounted photograph. But if you do have a stereo view, many of them are curved. And just to let you know, that is on purpose. That the idea of that was that it would actually lend itself to the 3D illusion if the card it was on was curved. So if you have a curved stereo view, it's not actually damaged. That's the way it's supposed to be. So please don't try to flatten it. Now I want to talk a little bit about photo albums. We already talked about scrapbooking, so creating new photo albums, but what happens if you already have a photo album? Like I mentioned about, finding a mystery plastic. If you have an old photo album and photos are in plastic sleeves and you're not sure of the quality of that plastic, I would suggest maybe ordering some new archival plastic sleeves and switching those out. These, your classic, really old black paper photo pages, I would suggest leaving them the way they are. I have seen a lot of botched removals, especially in my own family photographs, where someone has tried to remove the photos out of an album and either torn the photo itself or torn up the photo behind it. Instead of trying to remove these photos from the black paper, I would suggest putting interleaving, so putting maybe a sheet of acid-free paper in between each page of the album. That will help soak up any kind of off-gassing acid that might be coming from these very non-archival pages. And same with if you have one of these really cool albums that actually hold usually tintypes or other mounted cabinet cards. Sometimes these might cause issues with the photographs themselves, especially these were basically, you were supposed to be able to put them together at your home. And sometimes that went a bit awry as far as, the adhesive of these front plates sometimes got on the photograph. But for the most part, if they're in there and they look stable, it's usually better to leave them. You can cause more damage trying to get them out than not. And last but not least, I have one here in person. Unfortunately, I can't show you, but I hope maybe if I give an audio component to this, maybe you can hear me lift up this plastic sleeve of these, what was called a magnetic photo album with this kind of orangey sticky striping with a plastic sheet that laid over it, and you can just pull the plastic sheet open, very popular in the 70s, and you can place your photos down and then lay the sheet on top of it. I think we all have these somewhere. I know most of my baby photos are in one of these. These are awful for photographs. Not only is this paper absolutely not archival, I mean, I think it's already it was brown when it was first made and it's only getting browner. But what can happen is this magnetic paper, these stripes of orangey sticky stuff that was supposed to be, it's called magnetic, where you can lift up your photograph and replace it and lift it up again. It will work like that unless, say, it's 30 years old or has spent any time in someone's car and has gotten hot. So if you have any of these albums, I would lift up that plastic. Here, we'll hear it again. Yeah, that sound. Lift up that plastic. Test very carefully to see if you can take your photos out. If you can, I would suggest taking your photos out of an album like this before they won't come up anymore. And if you can't pull them out, then stop trying, or reach out for some professional help to try and remove your photos from one of these albums. because one of the biggest dangers of these is, yeah, that goo on the sheet will basically often start to become permanent. And I've had several albums of these to where I could not get the photograph off. And sometimes in that case, you just need to maybe remove the top sheet of plastic, take the sheet out, and put some acid-free paper interleaved between those sheets to try to mitigate any acid. Because if the photograph won't come off, sometimes you just have to live with that nasty, nasty brown page. Real quick, I want to talk a little bit about film, because I'm sure you might have some negatives. You may even have some actual moving image film. What you probably don't have is any nitrate film. But if you do, you need to be aware of it. Whoops, don't know why my slide's going. If you do have nitrate film, you need to be aware of it. Nitrate is highly flammable, but it is also beautiful. It's what the name the silver screen came from. It creates this beautiful glow when it's projected onto a movie screen, which is why even after they created acetate, which was called safety film in 1909, you can see they continued using nitrate for movie film even into 1951, because it was just beautiful, even though movie houses were burning down and people were dying, because once ignited, nitrate cannot be put out with water. It can also, in extreme cases, so this is usually like if a large amount of film is being stored in a sealed container to where it's, you know, it's creating a lot of, it's holding up a lot of chemical gases are you know, kind of building up, it can combust on its own. So if you have any negatives or any moving image strips that were made in this era, you might want to take a close look. Take a look at the edge of the film to see if it says safety film. That would mean that it's on acetate and you're fine. I can also be happy to help identify if I think 8mm came out. I don't think there is a nitrate 8mm film to answer one of our questions. I can definitely look it up, but your question is to tell if it's acetate or polyester. I think polyester may have not been used very much for 8mm. I'd have to look that up. Acetate is what you will most commonly find. And while it is not prone to spontaneously combusting, it is very prone to breaking down with something called vinegar syndrome. And it's called that because it smells like vinegar. It's basically the plastic is breaking down to its base chemical components, and one of its things it's off-gassing is that vinegar smell. And you will completely lose your image if it goes too far. So take a look at your plastic films, and if they smell very vinegary, you may want to look into making sure they get copied, either a digital copy, or, you know, if it's negatives, that you take it to a nice photo studio and get yourself a nice you know, print version of the photograph. And then polyester, this is not very common, except for in modern films. So you might not have this in your family history, even though it was made in 1955. You got to give a little bit for how it didn't become popular right at 1955. Also, polyester isn't used very much for rolled up film because it's so strong it won't maintain that roll, so it's hard to roll onto a core. So chances are slim that you would have polyester, but if you do, that's great because it is virtually indestructible and will basically last forever. So If you do have film on a reel, you can, the best way to store them are in these conservation canisters. They let the film breathe, and they've got ridges where it can sit up and not be squashed against the bottom of a can. You can find these here at tuscancorp.com. Also for sheet film or roll film, you know, in strips, I would suggest making sure they are not in any kind of plastic enclosure. I would use only paper for your film. In the case of photographs on paper, you know, we talked about if there was any kind of water damage in your house that you need to go pull out your photographs of your plastic sleeves. That's so that they can dry out. So even paper photographs have a problem with plastic sleeves sometimes, but at least then they do have a paper substrate that can be a little flexible as far as you know, absorbing and releasing moisture. When it comes to plastic substrates, they have no give and take for moisture, and moisture levels can seriously harm the emulsion layer on a plastic on film. So you want to make sure you keep them in a paper envelope, and not the paper envelope that came from Eckerd, but an actual acid-free paper envelope. I see a couple other questions. Okay, I got to the negatives one. Original metal film cans. Usually, you know, you have to make your own decisions for your own collection. The question is, are original metal film cans okay? You know, ideally what you would want to do is take the film out of that can, keep the can, because the can probably has, you know, some pertinent information. It's definitely a part of, you know, that artifact. That's the museum person in me talking. You know, if this is a film that was purchased, it, you know, it probably has the movie label on it. If it was a film that was, you know, a family film that was taken, it probably has some writing on the, you know, metal can, and probably has some sentimental value. But the film itself should probably be taken out of the can and put in one of these, because the film can't breathe in those cans. And I've got about, you know, if you have films in metal cans, I'll bet you if you open them up, you're going to get hit with a wall of vinegar coming at your face, because they've just been sitting there and off-gassing and then sitting in their own juices, that vinegary smell, and that just makes it worse and starts to decompose them more. So you want to get them out of that airtight metal. Metal canisters can also rust, and put them in a conservation can if you have the money and are able to. So I'll wrap it up there. I know we only have about 7 minutes left, but if you have any questions that you didn't type in the chat while during the presentation, please do now. I'm going to read through these and make sure I didn't skip a question. Oh, I did skip a question. Brea asks, if photos are stored together, will pencil rub off on the next photo? I have never seen pencil rub off on the next photo, but I have seen pen rub off on the next photo. That is actually a question that Kim Peters and I were talking about before the presentation, is storing photos together. It is always ideal to store photos separately, either in separate plastic sleeves or maybe interleaved with some paper, just to, you know, avoid any kind of sticking together. Or even, you know, if you interleave them with some paper, that will always help mitigate any kind of acid migration or anything. But sometimes that's just not possible. You have too mmany photos. There's, you know, I have it that way. My personal photos, I have, you know, this huge stack of all the photos that were taken on one vacation, and there hasn't been time or resources to go through and interleave them or put them all in individual sleeves. So it's one of those things where the best thing to do would be to have them individually. But if you can't, it's you know, just look at what, you know, what is that stack of photos stored in. Make sure they're not, you know, rolled up with a you know, in a rubber band. Are they, you know, stored in a folder? Is where they're stored causing them to bend? That's another thing I didn't really talk about. We store our photos mostly in vertical folders, in boxes, but we have to be careful to make sure that we don't put only a few photos in a box, and then those photos kind of, you know, fall over, and then they sit kind of in a curve and start to bend, because bending is very damaging to photographs. Okay, photos formed together. Another worry about storing photos together, like in a stack like that, is if you were to ever have flooding or some type of, you know, water issue in your home. What tends to happen is if photos are all together like that, they will just fuse into a brick of paper and emulsion all mixed together, and you won't be able to pull them apart. That, of course, is, you know, you're not probably expecting to have that kind of water damage to those photos, but it is something to keep in mind. And what about storage of slides? A collection of Kodachrome slides from late 40s, early 50s. So storing slides. Slides are going to be basically the same rules as negatives, or they're a type of film. They're on that plastic substrate. Slides, it's really tempting to put slides in a plastic sleeve. They do have often that paper element of that frame, so slides do react better to being stored in, like, they make specialized sheets of, you know, basically you can get a 3-hole punch plastic sleeve to put each individual slide in. That's how I have my personal slides. I know I said no plastic, but it's a little bit different if it does have that paper frame around it. Also, you know, the one thing about slides is you have the addition of that little frame around it. Usually the frames are fine. Don't feel like you have to rip apart the frame and take out the slide, but sometimes you might have some issues with the frame. And you can always reach out for help if you think that your frame is causing damage to the slide, because sometimes, you know, they come in plastic, they come in metal, and most commonly paper. But for the most part, we tend to keep them the way they are. And those little plastic carousels, though, it is good to get them out of that, because that is not safe plastic. Oh, we have a question. Does archival paper allow for separating photos if water damaged? So water and photos is a very dangerous combination. If you do have like intense flooding in your house and your photos get water damaged, a lot of times it's just really hard to do anything about that. But I know I have seen a stack of photos. What happens with that? Having some kind of separation between your photos, paper, especially plastic, like if they were in plastic sleeves, will sometimes make it a little bit easier to try and salvage them. But a lot of times when you're talking about massive water damage, there isn't any salvaging. Oh, we have a question about what should one do to eliminate brownish spotting on a photograph? I'm wondering if you're talking about probably foxing. Kind of, no one really knows exactly what causes it, but a lot of times, often on paper, you'll just get brown spotting, like on an old book. The front pages of an old book will just have lots of brown spots. Same same for the same goes for photographs. Usually there's not a way to eliminate that on the actual photograph. If it is something that like an ink mark, there are products that can possibly clean the emulsion, but they need to be used very carefully. And there's also the question about flattening photographs. It is very difficult to flatten a photograph. Do not try to do that on your own. You would need to reach out to a professional. It is much easier to flatten just a piece of paper, but like I said, photo emulsion reacts very poorly to water and humidity, and you might end up, destroying your photograph if you tried to flatten one out on your own. So we've got a question of where can you go to have prints made from very old negatives. If you are here in Orlando, there are some places that still make prints from negatives, like Colonial Photo and Hobby. Anywhere you want to go, you just want to maybe ask a lot of questions. Ask them, how do they handle their photographs, or how do they handle their negatives, how do they process things. Try to riddle them with questions, make sure they actually know what they're doing. Feel free to, don't feel like you have to be an expert too, but maybe give them a call, ask them a bunch of questions, write down their answers, and then Google their answers and see if their answers are correct. But there are still a few, it's basically hobby studios that will print out photos from negatives, and also, photographic artists will do that as well. We have a question about what kind of pencil to use. You don't need to buy a super special pencil. You can use a regular pencil as long as you don't push too hard. You might want to go to a softer lead, but they also make basically an artifact pencil that we use here that writes really well on plastic and glass and things like that. It's got a little bit of a wax content. And sometimes I find it absolutely impossible to write on the back of a photograph with a normal pencil, because a lot of times the back of the photograph, the paper is so slick and treated that it won't take a normal pencil graphite. So you can find basically a glass / plastic pencil made to write on those type of mediums, and those are good for photos. Oh, I will send everyone an example, these slides to your emails, because Amanda has all of your emails. So I will send everyone this slide presentation so that you don't feel like you have to remember all of those places to go purchase supplies and things like that. We have a question, what about storing items in the types of envelopes that stamps are stored in? Oh, yes, the glassine envelopes that stamps are stored in, those are awful. If you have, and negatives are often stored in that. In fact, I have a file cabinet full of about 3,000 negatives here at the museum from a commercial photographer with all of his negatives, and every negative is stored in a little glassine envelope like that. That is definitely a project you might want to move up a little bit on your priority list, as far as moving things out of those glassine envelopes. You don't know what that is. It's like Priscilla says, they are the types of envelopes that stamps are stored in. It's like, you look at it and it's like, is this paper? Is this plastic? It's kind of see-through. It's usually kind of cream colored, very crinkly. Those break apart and degrade and really start to affect the things that are around very quickly. So I would definitely move those, remove those, and replace them with like paper envelopes. Brea asks if there is a recording. I have no idea if this has been recorded or not.
Hi, this is Amanda chiming in.
Thank you.
Yes, it will be recorded, and then it will also be posted on the History at Home page of the History Center's website, which is thehistorycenter.org.
Excellent. Perfect. There's your answer. Thank you for answering. So it is 1:04. Thank you all for joining in. I think we had we had more people here than I thought we would have. This was awesome. Please feel free to keep chatting with me. I'll stick around for a couple more minutes, but if you need to leave, understandable, it's after 1. And also, if you come up with any questions as you are going through your family photos, feel free to send me an email. Feel free to snap a picture of something you see that you're like, oh my gosh, what is this? How do I deal with this? Take a photo and send it to me in your email. Oh, no problem. Thank you for all of your questions. And I think I got everyone's question, but if for some reason I missed someone's questions, just pop in the chat again and be like, hey, you forgot my question. You skipped me. So I know we are doing, Amanda, maybe you can answer this better, other at-home sessions. We're doing a lot of webinars and things while all of our staff is working from home, correct?
Yes, we have Central Florida History 101 coming up next Friday. We have some interesting, fun stories about Central Florida the following Friday, and then we'll have a follow-up on oral history practice on the 29th. So we typically have programs every Friday. Check the website that I posted in the chat above, the History at Home page, with all of our at-home programming.
Thank you. Out of our remaining attendees, I'm curious if anybody has any cased photographs, any daguerreotypes or ambrotypes in their family collection. I don't. I only have 10 types. Okay, it looks like the questions have stopped. So I'm going to go ahead and start logging off. So thank you all for joining us. And especially thank you, Brea, for joining us from New York.